Welcome to the Men Unplugged Show. Get ready to plug in and recharge your life, family, and career while igniting your faith in Christ. Now, here's your host and champion of helping men live with passion and purpose, Jeff Jarina.
Hey, how's it going? Jeff Jarina here, and welcome to episode 36. Today's podcast is really going to fire you up as my guest and I discuss some important and relevant information that you more than likely don't have. With that said, I hope you'll take about 10 seconds right now to share this podcast with someone else. Now, you can do that through any podcast platform as well as from the podcast player of this episode on our website. Now, to receive updates about every podcast and resource that we have available, you can do so by subscribing to our weekly email list or through our social media channels. Simply go to the Start Here page on our website at menunplugged.net. Now let's chat with today's featured guest, Fulton Sheen. Fulton, welcome to the show, brother. Are you ready to help men plug in and recharge?
I am ready.
Fulton served 3 consecutive terms as a Michigan State representative, as well as operated a financial advisory practice for 20 years with his wife, Cheryl. Currently, he directs Isaiah 58:12, a faith-based disaster and preparedness group, as well as a national and international speaker on economic and financial issues. So Fulton, take about 30 seconds and tell us a little bit about your personal life.
Well, I've got my wife and I live in Michigan, and we live in a place called Otsego, right in between Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it's the west side, and we're down near the bottom. And I have 3 daughters, all of which are married. One of them's about 400 feet away and right across the road from us, and the other one is about 15 minutes away, and then the next one is way down in North Carolina. And so, we love to be together. One of the favorite things that we do is get together for, anything from a birthday, a holiday, but almost any day. We just like getting together, and anything needs to be done in our families, whether it's move somewhere, fix something, paint something, we're all there. And it's always been that way from the time they were little girls to now they're in their 30s and have some of their own children. We're still in it all together.
Well, that's really cool about your one daughter there living 400 feet away. Now, you've been busy of late here. You were just out in London in March giving a talk about the international political and economic climate. And with that said, Fulton, what a great day it was 2 days ago, Monday the 14th, when we moved the American embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which recognizes Jerusalem as the one and only eternal capital of Israel. What's really fascinating to me, and you probably think so as well, is that this move is on the 70th year anniversary when Israel was rebirthed as a nation, the only nation, as you know, to ever be reborn. And Fulton, I'm so excited for Israel, the Jewish people, and for all Christians, because this move is vital for all of us. And thank you, President Trump, for doing what you said you would do. So can you explain what the immediate and future impact of this move is?
Well, it's interesting. This has been a long time coming because this provision to do this actually passed in the 1990s. And so many of the presidents said that when they got in office, they were going to do it, but only one of them came through and followed through on their promise to do it, and that was President Trump. And so in 1948, Israel was established as a state. So this happened on the 70th anniversary. In the Bible, we all know 7 is considered the perfect number.
Yes.
And all kinds of things happen. 7 every 7 years, every 70 years. So this is very strategic, and the Bible is full of appointed times. So I believe this is an appointed time that occurred. And the interesting thing is when we voted to do this in the United Nations, there were 9 other nations that did not vote against us, whereas the rest of them did. And those 9 other nations are now going to be establishing their embassies. So the interesting thing is, because we did what we did, we're not the only nation that's going to be establishing their embassies in Jerusalem. And so now not only the United States, but 9 other nations are also recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. And I believe as time goes on, you're going to see more and more of that. And the other thing that you've got going on is you see some networks are covered the entire ceremony, which I watched, and other nations didn't cover it. They focused on the fact that Hamas had stirred up all these demonstrators along the borders who were heaving bombs and basically scaling the wall, all of which, you don't just go into another nation, especially one, like Israel, where generally all the nations around them don't like them.
Right.
And, they were heaving bombs, threatening the lives of those soldiers, and basically storming the walls. And their goal was to kill the Israelis. And so, but over and over again, what do many of the news channels focus upon? They focus upon that. They didn't focus upon what each of the people said in their speeches. And if you watch the presentation, and it's very available on YouTube, and you can watch it, you can hear what was said. Everything was very honoring. Everything was very, they were the Israeli people were very happy. Basically this was a long time coming. They recalled how Israel came about, and so this is definitely a historic time. And if you believe, like it says in the Bible, that those who bless the Jews and who prays for peace in Jerusalem and for God's people will be blessed, then the United States has just carved out a blessing for themselves, having recognized them, having moved the embassy the way they did, just like Harry Truman, when he was the first nation in the world to recognize Israel as a nation, did. So we have to remember, this is the first time the United States has been the first nation to do something. This is a repeat of what happened 70 years ago when Harry Truman did the same thing, and then the other nations followed.
Absolutely. And he did that, President Truman, on the same day, on the 14th, just after Israel was declared a Jewish state, again, being rebirthed. And you know what? On those 9 nations that you were talking about, I just read that Guatemala just followed America's lead and moved their embassy to Jerusalem today. How cool is that?
Yep.
So let's talk
about very cool.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the recent bombings in Damascus by Israel, and which is a direct response to Iran's bombings of the Golan Heights. So how much of Damascus that you know of is uninhabitable right now?
Well, I don't really know about how much of it's uninhabitable. What I do know about the bombs that were the 20-some missiles that were sent over to Israel from there, I do know that the Israelis went in, and that all of this was orchestrated by Iran. Mm-hmm. And so Israel's response basically took out all kinds of, it took out their communications, it took out their places where the bombs came from. It basically, they got defeated, and they got defeated very badly. And even though the press is siding with demonstrators right now and, alerting everybody that these guys who basically were committing criminal acts were killed, nobody's saying anything about the fact that when they lobbed the 20 missiles over at Israel, Israel responded in a far more dramatic way, and basically took out all kinds of installations. And neither Russia, nor any of the European nations, nobody's criticizing Israel for that, because that was a direct defending of their nation. So the problem that you have here is that Hamas, the Palestinians, the whole thing over there, this is a huge setback for them, politically and symbolically, and basically it changes the whole board as to what's happening, because it might have taken 30 years for the U.S. to follow through on their recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, but it would be very difficult to reverse, because you'd have to have a bill to reverse it, because all that's happened here is Congress approved a bill and the president just simply needed to enact it. And so at this point, they'd have to reverse it. And I think reversing it will be far more difficult than it was basically deciding to put the embassy there.
Absolutely. And isn't it amazing how the way the press really reports stuff, and they didn't say what really happened, what Israel's really doing? That is amazing to me.
CNN basically said, when they said, why didn't you carry Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, which was very, very good. And they said, we believe, we didn't consider it relevant. We thought it was more relevant of what was going on in the border. That's what CNN said and stated when asked that question.
Wow. So with everything that's transpiring right now on the global stage, and there is a lot. I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot. Financially, politically, socially, and to me, more importantly, spiritually, how can we as Christians across the globe be prepared for what's ahead? Now, obviously, we spoke a little bit about this before we recorded the show, and obviously that's probably like a 5-episode show, but kind of give me maybe 2 or 3 things that come to the top of your head, Fulton, that you're saying, you know what, we really need to be looking out for and preparing for this.
Well, one thing that we know is when you're reading what Jesus said, when they said, what do we do in the end times? And in Matthew 24 and 25, in Mark 13, in Luke 21, the Lord said, be alert, be watchful, and be ready. So we need to take that into consideration. We need to focus on that. You know, right after that in Matthew 25, you have the story of the 10 virgins. And, you know, there were 10 virgins. They were all believers. They loved one another. But 5 of them were wise. 5 of them weren't bad and 5 of them good. 5 of them were wise. And why were the 5 that were wise? They were wise because they were ready. They didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but they had their lamps full. They did everything God told them to do to be ready. So when it happened, they were able to go with the Lord. They were able to go through the door. They were ready for the bridegroom to return. In many ways, they were the original preppers. So we need to understand that and go before the Lord and say, what does that mean to us? Because when the end time events begin to unfold, it said many will be deceived, and many hearts will wax cold. Not some, not few, but many and most. And so we need to understand that. And when it all starts hitting the fan, Christians aren't to react, because everybody's going to be reacting.
Right.
In a crisis, we need to respond, not react.
That's big.
And
say that again, Fulton. That is so big.
Well, in a crisis, and when you prepare for something and you train for something, you're training to be able to respond to the event, not react to the event. Because when the event unfolds, what do? If you've trained and you've prepared, you're going to do exactly what you planned. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And so you're not going to be going, oh my gosh, what do I do? You're going to be ready, and you'll have thought it through. And the Lord told us He's going to tell us what to do. Just like He told Joseph when the 7 bad years were coming, He told him what to do, and Joseph did it. Well, we need to do the same thing.
Very big. I really appreciate that word right there. Guys, if you're listening to the show right now, be prepared so that you can respond and not react. Reaction means that we're acting in a way out of fear, not knowing what to do. But as just Fulton said right there, if you're prepared, knowing what you should do, you respond in a more calm manner. So let's go back to 2009. I don't want to jump around here, but I want to go back here to 2009 when the Fed, the Federal Reserve, started printing money, fiat currency, in lieu of declaring a bank holiday. And afterwards, all the other central banks across the world followed suit. So from your economic and financial expertise, how long can we keep this up before this fiat currency? I mean, this stuff isn't even backed by anything physical. There's no physical asset that is backing it up before it crashes the entire system.
Well, let me just give you a tad background. In 2009, 2008, what occurred is we had the financial crisis. And why did that occur? Well, it occurred because basically Standard & Poor's and Moody and the main international raters were literally lying about the ratings that were on, they were giving a AAA rating to all these mortgages that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are the federal mortgage, groups,
yes, sir,
that buy all the mortgages from all the banks. They were basically lying about the financial stability of those things. And so what ended up happening is when the lid came off of all these things, property values fell 25 to 50%. And then the stock market dropped tremendously. And because what happened is the wool had been pulled off the eyes. Now, there's a number of different things that happened going up to that, because just to give you a little background, when during the Depression and after the Depression, they passed laws in 1940 in the Investment Act that basically separated, the Glass-Steagall Act separated bank deposits from other bank investments, which means if a bank was completely wrong in all their other investments, the depositors' monies were safe because they couldn't leverage it. They couldn't be able to leverage that money, because we live in a fractional banking system, which means they can leverage 10 times the value of an asset that they hold. So if they own a piece of property that's $1 million, they can leverage it up to $10 million. If they have deposits like Chase Bank for $8 million, they can leverage it up to $8 billion.
I wished I could do that.
I know, but they can leverage it up to 78, up to 80 billion, which is exactly what they do. So with your Chase Bank right now, see, as of last year, they had 8 trillion deposits, but they had 78 trillion of derivatives. And a derivative is an investment instrument that derives its value from something else. So in that case, you can have stock derivatives, property derivatives, and in a bank's case, deposit derivatives. So what happened is, in 1999, we repealed the portion of the Glass-Steagall Act which protected people's deposits. So now the banks could invest, they could leverage up to 10 times the values of people's deposits, in addition to all the other investments that they had. So they became much more over-leveraged. So then, in 2007, 1 year before the crisis, Bank of America led a movement to make derivatives the primary creditor before anybody else that would get paid in an insolvency or in a crisis. So then we need to understand that when they made derivatives ahead, now bank depositors were secondary creditors to a bank, to their own deposits, because derivatives were now primary. And Bank of America led that through Congress. And then what happened to Lehman's? Well, Bank of America at 4:00 on Friday, right before the close of the markets, basically told Lehman Brothers, we want all our money. Well, Lehman Brothers only had 6.5% that was equity. The rest of it was debt.
Right.
And because of all the leveraging, one bank asking for their money being the size of Bank of America, it meant that bank would become the primary creditor of the money, and Lehman Brothers opened up on Monday insolvent.
Wow.
And that set off everything that went on. So instead of dealing with the problems and basically putting the bankers in jail for what they did, and basically fining the banks and getting the money back to the people, basically the taxpayers, not only did they lose value of their money, but the taxpayers then had to bail out all the banks. So then the Federal Reserve was printing money, and they printed this money, and what did they buy? They bought Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's, which basically helped that group, which had lied and was, did all these things and defrauded the American people. They basically, because they kept buying huge masses of bonds at 3 and 4%, which was the face value of the interest of the mortgage interest rates, during that time, they ended up buying like $15 trillion. Now, in 2009 and 10, they bought $8 trillion. But since then, they've bought like actually, it's about $18 trillion now.
Wow.
So you're in a situation where when we were printing money, we printed so much money that all of a sudden, for the first time in modern times, the U.S. bicycles, computers, and cell phones were now less expensive than the French bicycles, cell phones, and computers, or the British, or the Chinese, because of the rapid devaluation of our dollar. So much so that had they not, in 2011, in the G20 conference, they said, you fix this or we're going to change that. Now, the reason it didn't hurt us as much as it could have at that time is we are the world's reserve currency. And that means that all the nations of the world, even if they don't have a treaty with another nation to trade with them, can buy and sell with U.S. dollars, whatever the world reserve currency is. We became the world reserve currency in 1944 in the Bretton Woods Accords. Before that, it was Britain. Before that, it was France. Before that, it was Spain. Before that, it was Portugal. So we're the world's reserve currency at the moment. And so basically what that means is we were able to take that devaluation of our dollar and spread it out over the whole world, not just to our nation, because no matter what happened, people still had to buy and sell in dollars if they didn't have direct treaties between the nations to trade with. So we could become as irresponsible as we wanted to be. And people would still have to use our dollars because not many nations had treaties with each other to directly trade with one another. And we own the world. Well, we don't own the World Bank. We just have the majority control over the World Bank, which is over in New York, along with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and so, which were also created, by the way, back in 1944. So the world had to just do whatever we wanted them to do because there wasn't any options. So we printed all this money, and today we've passed the $21 trillion mark. Okay, and so the mathematical problem that's going to come back and hit us very soon is this. If interest rates rise, right now they're the lowest they've ever been. We have a fictitious interest rate. Mm-hmm. Our interest rate is only 1.25% to 1.5%. And so we're it's artificially low. But our treasuries are like 3%. Okay? So they're generally, and I mean, this isn't an absolute thing, but they're generally about twice the amount of what the prime rate is. And the prime rate, again, right now is 1.25% to 1.5%.
Right.
So here's the problem. If we bought $18 trillion worth of assets with a face value of 3 and 4%, and currently with the last interest rate hike, it's driven up our treasuries up to 3%. And we increase this year, like they said, 4 times. Well, then here's what's going to happen. Every quarter point is actually a half a point. So if we do raise interest rates, say 3 more times, that's 1.5% of interest. So instead of being 3%, then our treasuries are going to be 4.5%. And if all the face values on all the treasuries we bought over that period of time, that $15 trillion have face values of 3 to 4%, and interest rates go to and our treasuries now go to 4.5%, then that $18 trillion of the $21 trillion that we purchased can no longer support the interest maintenance on the debt that we owe the rest of the world. And that's when things will start to go downhill, because now we'll have to take current revenues to pay for the interest on the money we owe the rest of the world.
Hey guys, if you really want to gain a better understanding of what some of these events mean from a biblical perspective, you need to get the digital copy of the Strand Study Bible, sold exclusively at menunplugged.net. To get your copy today, go to the resources page on our website or type menunplugged.net/Bible in your web browser. Now, you mentioned something there. When there was one nation trading with another nation, basically that trade, the exchange currency was the dollar. But over the past couple of years, and correct me if I'm wrong, Russia and China have traded outside of, without the dollar.
Well, actually, it's much worse than that. What's happened is, see, the last time that this happened, what occurred was there was only one World Bank, and there was only one way to wire money. Whether you were an individual, a business, or a nation, everything had to go through the World Bank and through the SWIFT system. But today, there's two things that are going on. First of all, almost every major nation now has a treaty. Almost every major nation has a treaty to trade currency to currency with another nation. So next time, they're not going to have to worry about what happens to the dollar. So next time we start printing money, it's going to hurt us much, much more. But unfortunately, it gets worse than that. In addition to that, there is a group called the BRICS group: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they said, you know what, we're getting the shaft from the World Bank. We're not getting the loans that we need. They're not helping us. They're not giving us what we want. We're going to create our own World Bank. So in fall of 2014, October, the first week, those nations laid down $50 billion, and they said over the next 6 months, we're going to have an open window, and any nation in the world that wants to join our new World Bank will join. And if you join in that 6-month window, we're going to give you a vote. And whether you're a big nation or a little nation, your vote's going to be just as valuable. And so anybody that joins, you'll be a founding member and you'll get a vote. But anybody who joins after that, you can be a member, but you're not going to get a vote and you're not going to get any say. So what happened is we got to about March, and about 2 weeks, mid-March, before the window closed. And at that point, there were about 29 nations that had joined. And so the U.S. criticized them. And, it's one thing when a bunch of nations you don't like so much goes and forms their own group. But it's another thing when your allies join, because what happened is on Friday, it was Friday the 13th in March, the UK joins the new bank. And what happens in the next 2 weeks? Almost every major nation in the world joined the new World Bank except us. So now you have a new World Bank that doesn't have to worry about the other World Bank. You have all these nations who are a part of it, and we have absolutely no part of it or no say in it at this point. And you have a situation where they don't have to worry about wiring money through us anymore. They can wire money on their own.
Right.
And so you've got a situation which has created a completely different financial structure than we had back in 2008. And now, the next time something happens, they're really not going to need us.
Right.
And there's going to be nobody to bail us out. And so you're in a nation, you're in a world and a situation where we have all these financial never happened befores. And most people don't even know about them. Oh, I told you that our prime rate is like 1 to 1.25%, which means the banks borrow from the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. central bank, they borrow their money at 1.25% to 1.5%. So if they're going to give people interest, it's going to be a lot lower than 1.25% or 1.5%. But if you lived in the European Union, well, the European Union was 29 and is now 27 nations, of which 18 are a part of a common currency called the euro. And the euro nations and the European Central Bank, their prime rate is negative 0.4%. Which means if you put money in one of the banks in Germany or France or some of these other nations, you lose money. People are literally losing money keeping it in the 18 euro nation banks. And in Japan, it's negative 0.1%. Well, how is that going to affect things? Well, they have no idea because there's never been negative interest rates until the last 2 years. So they don't have a clue what's going to happen. They don't have a 5-year or a 10-year chart to look at. So what's happened is you've got these negative rates. Now that's amazing enough, but now they literally, these nations, and in my PowerPoints I can show people this, but these nations have literally created negative coupon bonds, which would mean like a U.S. savings bond or U.S. Treasury that would have a negative coupon rate. Like you're guaranteed to lose 0.25% or 0.5% in those bonds. And you'd say to yourself, well, why would anybody buy those bonds? Well, here's why. If you're a financial institution, if you're a pension fund, if you're an insurance company, if you're any kind of financial company and you're required to have a certain amount of money in a fixed and guaranteed position, then you have to buy them, because the only thing that's considered fixed and guaranteed anymore, because 5 years ago the G20 nations said the only thing that would be considered fixed and guaranteed would be sovereign debt issued by a nation.
Right.
So if you're any of those things, you have to buy those bonds. You have no choice. So you go and you buy these bonds that you're guaranteed to lose money on, and now you have to even get riskier on your other investments to make up for the fact that you're losing money on your fixed and guaranteed assets. I mean, this is the world we live in today.
Well, tell them about that one. I heard your speech there at the International Christian Chamber of Commerce in March of this year out in London. And I heard that speech, great speech, by the way. And you said, this was interesting to me, the number one product that Germans have been buying over the past, I don't want to get this wrong here, maybe the past year or two, has been safes. Safes to put your valuables in, because one of the banks, and correct me if I'm wrong, told their customers to get the money out of their banks, because if they keep it there, the bank and the customer was going to lose money. And some of the ones that you mentioned here, and the countries are Germany, Finland, Netherlands, Austria, Belgium, France, Ireland, Spain, Italy. I mean, there's a lot there. It really is. So this stuff right here financially is rampant. What do you have to say about that, maybe in about a minute?
Well, again, these are things that they have no clue what to do with them because they've never taken place before. They don't know what they're going to do about it. And the debt continues to rise at the moment. The EU nations, the European Central Bank, is still printing 1.8 trillion euros a year. Japan has been printing, and they've been doing that for 3 years now. And Japan, for the last 5.5 years, have been printing 200 billion yen per month. And so,
wow.
So the problem that you have is all these nations, they're printing, but just like somebody who would come into our financial planning office and say, well, I got $200,000 in credit cards, I owe $150,000 on my house, I owe $20,000 on my car, and those are the big bills. And they say, is there anything I can do? And I did do some calculations. They said, well, in 28 years, you might be able to pay this off as long as you stay tight and really, really work on it for the next 28 years. Could you do that? And they say, no way I can do that. So what do? They go bankrupt. Well, a nation is no different. It doesn't matter how many zeros you have on there. If you have too many zeros and you can't pay the interest maintenance on what you owe, well, people go bankrupt and nations default. we've watched nations default. We saw Cyprus defaulted, Greece defaulted, Argentina defaulted, Venezuela defaulted. I mean, this is what happens when you put yourself in that position. And the U.S. and the EU and Japan will be no different.
Mm. Well, you just mentioned the EU there on the tails of that. I want to congratulate Britain for leaving the EU. Well, that was big time, wasn't it?
Well, it is. The big war that we've got going on in the world today is globalism versus nationalism.
Yes, sir.
Because what's happening in the world today is the British want to be British. The Americans want to be Americans. The Russians want to be Russians. The French want to be French. This is what's going on in the world. And basically all the globalists who want to have one world government, and as believers we know where that ends up, they've been set back hugely. I mean, Italy just had elections about 3 or 4 weeks ago and nobody won.
Wow.
So, they haven't been able to form a government yet. And in a parliamentary government, you have about 90 days to form a government. But nobody won. There was not one party that won like a majority. I mean, there was a party that won one more seat than the other party, but it doesn't give them a majority. So you've got a situation now where in Italy, the people who did run were either anti-EU or leaning anti-EU. So no matter who ends up ruling Italy, they're probably going to have their own exit. And then Poland and Austria and the Czech Republic don't want to take any immigrants. And so that's in complete loggerheads with what's going on over in the UK. And then the UK has until March of 2019 to have either done a soft Brexit, which is a negotiated exit from the EU, or a hard Brexit, which means they just exit and there's no treaties and they don't get to trade with the EU. And at the moment, the only thing they've decided upon was the divorce settlement. And other than that, they can't get by some of the first things where they say, we have to have open borders, and Britain says, no way. And also they said, you have to obey European courts, and Britain says, no, we're going to obey our own courts. So those are like two major pillars which they can't get farther. But if I was Britain, I would figure I'm never going to get my soft exit, but I'm going to play this out and stretch this out till March of 2019, because at least I can have the same treaty and continue to trade with the EU until then, and I'm going to tee up all kinds of other agreements with other nations, so when the one switch goes off, I can turn the other switch on.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it. Fulton, there is just so much information here. I mean, this right here, this show, we could do this for about 10 podcast episodes. All right, that wraps up today's podcast, the first half of my interview with Fulton Sheen. Make sure you tune into episode 37 as I wrap up my conversation with Fulton. And to keep up to date on future podcasts, resources, and also to provide your valuable feedback, join the Men Unplugged email list, Facebook page, or my personal Twitter feed at Jeff Gerina. That's JEFFJERINA. And you know what? Don't forget to share this podcast to someone else that you know right now, because chances are they don't have this information and they really need it. Until next time, stay plugged in and recharged. God bless.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. There's plenty more to see at menunplugged.net, including key resources and ways to engage with Jeff in his training and speaking forums. While there, don't forget to subscribe and receive a free gift. We look forward to you joining us next time here on the Men Unplugged Show.